Hello. So we're going to start something new here at Wayfarers again, recording these talks each week. I know there's been a lot of times when people are out of town, people are sick for whatever reason, aren't able to join us. And so these are going to be a recording of a very similar talk to one that I will give on the following Sunday. But I just wanted these to be available for times when people are not able to join us in our living room right now. So right now we are in the midst of Lent. And I think one of the things Lent is supposed to do is just kind of disrupt us. It's supposed to kind of mess up our just march forward, this progress we're always doing, this rush we have. It's supposed to be a season of kind of reflection. It's supposed to be a season that forces us to focus on some of the harder parts of life, our own mortality, our own limits, and recognize that those can be something that can sharpen us towards better life and to better faith. Um, so, again, with that idea in mind, that Lent is a disruption, we're going to look at a quick passage this week out of Luke, one of the traditional readings that maybe disruption for this feels a little small. This one, in some ways, almost feels like a grenade of Jesus' teaching. So, I am in Luke chapter 13, starting in verse 1. Some who were present on the occasion told Jesus about the Galileans whom Pilate had killed while they were offering sacrifices. He replied, "Do you think that the suffering of these Galileans prove that they were more sinful than all the other Galileans? No, I tell you, but unless you change your hearts and lives, you will die just as they did. And what about those 18 people who were killed when the Tower of Siloam fell on them? Do you think that they were more guilty of wrongdoing than everyone else who lives in Jerusalem? No, I tell you, but unless you change your hearts and lives, you will die just like they did." Then Jesus told this parable. A man owned a fig tree planted in his vineyard. He came looking for fruit on it and found none, and said to his gardener, "Look, I've come looking for fruit on this fig tree for the past 3 years, and I've never found any. Cut it down. Why should it continue depleting the soil's nutrients?" The gardener responded, "Lord, give it one more year. I'll dig around it. I will give it fertilizer. Maybe it'll produce fruit next year. If not, then you can cut it down." And so Jesus' discussion here, there's kind of a couple reads on this. One element that's going on is Jesus is heading towards Jerusalem. A lot of people are hoping he's going to declare himself kind of a political messiah. And so a lot of people think that this was brought up, this offensive event, this horror of the governor, the Roman governor, killing these innocent pilgrims. And so people, I think, are trying to get him fired up the same way we often do at political rallies. Look how bad this terrible person is. Aren't we going to fix this? Aren't we going to do this thing right? And so they're trying to get Jesus fired up. They're trying to get him to probably play politics, play with violence the way that many other people in his time did and were supported. And yet Jesus wants to take it in another direction, because another read on this that some people have is that this horrible thing happened to these people because obviously they were bad. They were bad, and therefore God did not save them and protect them, because bad things obviously cannot happen to good people. And when we put it that starkly, it sounds a little bit silly. And yet, this idea of kind of cause and effect, whether it's moral or just, when bad things are happening in our lives, is one that's very common both in religious circles. It's also one that's just super common in our kind of information-based culture, right? The amount of time we are encouraged to be looking at information, looking at blogs, any problem that comes up, there's information out there. And there's also a little bit of a smugness that we have to be really careful of, because when something bad happens to a neighbor, a coworker, or something, we tell ourselves, well, that wouldn't happen to me because I balance my budget more correctly, because I work harder, because I've done the homework and know that that health problem comes from eating XYZ. And I'm not saying that having responsibility in those areas is bad, but I think we can tend to look at something bad happening and think that there's an obvious cause that we, being so smart and so spiritual, can avoid. and therefore that sort of thing won't happen to me. At the end of the day, it is this theology, this cause and effect idea is one that we are trying to have control so bad things won't happen to us, and it is something we are trying to justify the fact that my life is going well right now is something I deserve. I've done my homework, I've worked hard, therefore I deserve these kinds of blessings. And this is just kind of the grenade that I talked about earlier. Jesus says very simply in a message that echoes the book of Job in the Bible, like says, no, you don't deserve these things. These people that these tragedies happen to, whether it's being slaughtered when they did not do anything wrong, whether it's this tower and there's the tragedies of life going on, he says, your heart is in the exact same place as theirs were, and this happened to them, and it could very easily happen to you. And so it gives us a bit of pause if we are taking this text really and say, no, I'm actually not ultimately in control, and the state of my heart is not one that is going to protect me from harm. This is a very real threat in the world. Again, in Jesus' way, the turn is always to not more information, not to working harder, but he says, I want you to follow my way and trust me to be the one that ultimately protects you. But that's kind of in the background of the other piece of this conversation, because Jesus, I think, wants to reframe the way we're thinking. When we most of the time want to look for an element of control, look for how we can deserve the blessedness we're having or avoid these tragedies happening to us and those we love, he asks a very different question. He says, look, you can't ultimately have control over the circumstances around you, but you can have some control over your heart. And so I think a better question that Jesus is asking us is not, do I have control? Am I a good person? Am I a bad person? Am I avoiding the potential harms and fears in the world? But is my life producing fruit? That question can also be scary in some ways with this parable that we're taught. The first thing I think we learn from this parable is that God does have some responsibility for us. The blessings we receive, the gifts we have been given, there is an expectation of fruit from them. We bear some kind of responsibility. But it's interesting in this story when Jesus comes, when the master comes, who's, kind of a God figure, a God the Father figure, he finds an advocate for even this fruitless tree. Even though 3 years in, the conditions are right, it should have produced fruit. How often do we feel like that's our lives? Like, man, I should have done more. I should have produced fruit. I should have, right? And yet, even here, there's a gardener, there's an advocate who is going to change the conditions yet again, make it possible for us to grow. And the metaphor breaks down a little bit here, just because, a tree obviously is supposed to be growing fruit. That's what it's made for, that's what it does, but it can't exactly will itself to be growing fruit and blessedness in the world, just as the gardener can create the conditions, but can't actually force it to grow fruit. And so I feel like in that we're in a bit of an odd spot. The question is, do we have some responsibility for God, for fruit, for spiritual fruit, for blessing the world, for making it more good and beautiful and aligning with the things that God wants? Yes, we do have some responsibility, but I think the Bible is really clear that we cannot just will our way, desire our way into doing that thing. We need the support. We need the help of God, and in this case, in this story, of our advocate, right? And so I guess I was struck by the fact that Jesus in this story is not forcing growth. He's not making us do this thing. He's creating the conditions for potential growth, for potential strength. And I wonder if there's not something in that, in what our fruit is supposed to look like. Again, that cause and effect idea can haunt us, saying, I will only do work if I can see the effect. I will only do this if I can say this is meaningful and this has results. But if God himself is allowing some ambiguity, some strength to the vine itself, how much of the work do we do actually falls into that, rather than controlling the circumstances and the things we do? Are we creating conditions for others to thrive? Should those around us just be blessed, have the potential? We cannot make them grow. We cannot make them enter into, I think, the beautiful things that God has for them and the world, just like God will not force us to. So can we have some humility? Can we, what did Jesus use to bring about growth? Manure. There's probably some good metaphors in there too for God using kind of the shit to bring about our strength and our growth. But can our fruit look that same way? Can we let go of this anxiety, this desire to control and have results, whether it's to protect ourselves from bad things or to say this work is meaningful and this work is not? Can we trust and bless and create conditions? And can we trust that God is able to do those things with us and for us? And so I think there is a really beautiful lack of control, which is both scary, but God desires to bring fruit out of us, to make our lives fruitful and full and blessed. Will we fight him on that, or will we, imitate and allow that kind of work to happen in us?